Our last unknown is unknown number 5, and you can make a record what the substance looks like. And what I have here in these test tubes, we've got the water. We're going to do solubility test, water, sodium hydroxide, hydrochloric acid, and sulfuric acid if we need. So we'll add a few drops of our unknown to the water. Happens there. And then I want you to kind of take a look. If you can see the top, some students may mistake that for the meniscus. And what I'm simply going to do is just add more of that unknown to that. And you see how that layer is getting larger? So I now know that's my layer. So there's insoluble in water for unknown 5. I'm going to take the sodium hydroxide solution, add enough so there'll be no question about its solubility, and I will stir these stronger acids and bases with the stirring rod there. But you can see that you've got the 2 layers that have formed. And then I'm going to add some of my unknown to the hydrochloric acid solution. And I'm just going to add a little bit more because of that layer. And you can see how you can see that top layer. So insoluble in hydrochloric acid. So now that leads us to the sulfuric acid. Add a few drops there. Stir that up, and if you notice, you do not see any type of layer up on top. So we would say that our sample unknown is soluble in sulfuric acid. Again, what does that do when we try to determine what class of functional groups? We've already talked about that before as far as either aldehydes, ketones, alcohols, esters, so on and so forth. So next we're going to do some chemical tests and hopefully fine-tune what this functional group is. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is test our unknown with the Ceric nitrate solution. So here's our blank. I'm going to put some Ceric nitrate into that test tube. And then we'll add a few drops of our unknown. Swirl that pretty good. And we could get 2 layers, but unless something has a drastic color change, we're going to consider that negative. So I'm not seeing anything too drastic. A little bit of a tint, but it should be kind of a bright red color. So I'm going to consider that negative. So now we're going to move to our chromic acid. I've got chromic acid dissolved in dissolved in acetone. That's our reference. Here's acetone. I'm going to add some of my sample to that, swirl that, and then we'll add some of our chromic acid. And notice, usually this is a fairly quick, even if it takes a couple minutes for the green precipitate, you typically see some color change. I don't see any color change, so we're going to consider that negative. So what does that tell you? Remember, chromic acid is an oxidizer. So if it's an oxidizer, something has to be susceptible to oxidation, which this substance is not. So think about those functional groups. Our next one is the 2,4-DNP. This is our control, the standard, with nothing in it except ethanol and the 2,4-DNP reagent. I have ethanol here. I'm going to add some of our unknown to it. Again, swirl to mix. And then I'm going to add some 2,4-DNP to that. And we'll see what happens. And if you notice, we formed a precipitate. So what does that tell you? And that was pretty much instantaneous. What does the 2,4-DNP pick up? Carbonyl groups of aldehydes and ketones. And then the last test that we will do will be the Iodoform test. And so I have water here. We're going to use water to dissolve our sample, and then if it's not soluble, which this one, since it wasn't soluble in water, I added another reagent dot saying to make it soluble. So we're going to add our unknown to this. We will follow that by adding some sodium hydroxide solution and then the Iodoform test, and then see what happens there. I'm going to add some of my unknown to the aqueous solution that has another substance in for solubility. And to that, I'm going to go ahead and transfer, I don't think this test tube, or it may be pretty full. I'm going to go ahead and add that mixture to the larger test tube. I'm going to add my sodium hydroxide solution to that. And then I'm going to add my iodine potassium iodide solution. So notice the brownish color disappear, and it looks like we're forming a precipitate. I'm going to stir that with a stirring rod. I'm going to let that sit a couple minutes and see if anything changes for that. Sometimes it does take a few minutes for that to form. And as you can see, this after a few minutes, we've got looks like formation of that yellow precipitate, which means that we have a methyl group that is right next door to that carbonyl group of an aldehyde or ketone.